Hey friends, Grace Online, welcome here. I am here in the lovely office where I often am shooting these videos with my dear friend Johnathan Heppner. This is take 27. Just kidding. It's actually the first take, but we know it's not going to be the one we're going to keep. So we wanted to start off with like a welcome. As you can see, this is a good friend of mine, Johnathan. Johnathan is going to be sharing the message this morning. And we wanted to start off just with a bit of an introduction, get an idea of who he is. I met Johnathan. He was in the Philippines. I was in Manitoba. We met online, realized we had a lot of things in common. We both love Jesus. We both love the scriptures. And we had started a relationship kind of online. And then he came to Canada. And since then, much has changed.
Yeah, it is. Is that how we met?
Yeah. Do you remember? It was actually Blaine who set us up. Okay, we can't use this now because it sounds like we're dating.
I think this is the one!
Okay.
Is that really how we met?
Yeah. Blaine connected us via Facebook, and then I cracked a joke, and you fired back with something just as sarcastic, and I knew we were going to be friends.
All right, yeah, that was...
Yeah, so you were in the Philippines, but you're not in the Philippines anymore. You're currently in Canada, but where were you previously? Like just recently before you came to Canada, you were in...
Greece.
Yeah. Now, what brought you to Greece?
Well, we served as missionaries in the Philippines for just about 20 years, and then had both felt like our season was closing. Like, well, this is not where we need to be anymore. And in some of my wife's travels, she had become friends with some people who were doing work with refugees coming from the Middle East and East Africa trying to get into the EU.
Yeah.
So she stumbled into into this relationship with people who've now become our really good friends. And she came home from that trip. This would have been about 3 years ago. And she just said, we're moving there.
Okay.
And being the wonderful, godly, good-looking husband that I am, I said, yes, dear. And thus I learned about how God leads us most of the time in our lives. We listen to our wives.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah. So
I'm not talking about you, Brenda.
So then you ended up in Greece, but not like when we think Greece, we think like Athens. You're not like mainland Greece. You're on an island.
Right. There's a handful of islands that just sort of string down along the western coast of Turkey. The largest one is the island of Lesbos. And so that's where we currently live.
Okay. And so refugees escaping predominantly Syria, anywhere in the Middle East? Where are they coming from?
This is the common misconception. So there are definitely Syrian refugees who are bona fide refugees. But they're really the smallest percentile of refugees that we're seeing trying to get into the EU, trying to get out of where they are.
Yep.
Mostly we see Afghanis, Iraq, Iran. We see just think of the eastern seaboard of Africa, so Eritrea, Ethiopia, even some from Nigeria. And there's a whole smattering of refugees. You can have political refugees, you can have economic refugees, you can have refugees who are fleeing war and famine and things like that. So we see a large sort of diaspora of just coming from everywhere as they're
So
running.
they'll come through Turkey because it's a short distance to where you are. Well, and then when they get there...
Yeah. It's easy to get into Turkey. This is why Turkey's the portal.
Okay.
Easy to get into Turkey. And it is the closest access to the EU. So some will go from Libya and try to straight shot up into Spain, but that's a long boat ride.
Right.
Where we live, Turkey is 8 kilometers away.
Okay.
So this becomes the fastest way to try to go.
So you survive the trip that far.
Yeah.
And what happens when you get to Lesbos?
Well, you are given asylum. So they give you asylum paperwork, which basically gives you access to the refugee camps. And then you're held in the camps while they decide, you go through a series of interviews, they decide whether or not you qualify as a refugee and they allow you to stay. And you get 3 shots. They'll do an interview, they'll assess. If you fail the interview, you have 2 more tries. And after the 3rd one, they put you on a boat back to Turkey.
Okay.
Yeah, it's...
So how many people right now on the island are kind of in that stage of like either being assessed or been allowed to stay? Like from what I've read, it seems like it's kind of overwhelming the number of people who are seeking asylum and who are kind of like stuck on the island.
It's in waves. So the peak of sort of the refugee, I don't want to use the word explosion, but this massive surge to get out of everywhere else was in 2015, 2016.
Okay.
And so it's, when we compare you sort of put it on a scale, it's nothing close to what it was. So in 2016, we were seeing, 250 boats a day landing on the beaches, right? So thousands of people and just overwhelming all the resources. Now we still see 200 or 300 a day, but which is overwhelming. It's still overwhelming. So it's a little island of 85,000 people. It's the largest. I was going to call it internment camp because that's really what it is. It's the largest refugee camp in the EU, and they process about 3 to 4, maybe on a good week they'll process 10 applications, so that might include a family, but we're seeing 300 people a day land. So it's, the camps they just continue to swell, and then what'll happen is they'll come through in a sweep and they'll put a whole bunch of people on the boat and dump them on the mainland, which is, I mean, there's layers of disaster here. So the one side of me understands that they're behind every 8 ball there is in existence, and they're desperately trying to deal with it. But the other side of that is most of Europe is swinging very right-wing, very fascist, and refugees are good for business because they bring so much money into the country from nonprofits and from humanitarian organizations, and even from the large humanitarian organization of the European Union. But nobody wants them. And so it creates this conflux of misunderstanding where you've got refugees who are not poor people. They're predominantly middle upper class, well-educated, gifted, talented. They're running because of crisis, not because, oh shoot, I wish it was easier to make money. I mean, this is not the way it is. And so it's this incredible tension of colliding worldviews, financial crisis, and all the things dumped onto these little islands where the locals then have to figure out, how do we sort through this, right? So
how are you and Tracy involved? Like, how are you helping? What does it look? I mean, currently you're not able to with COVID, but you're here in Canada.
Currently, I'm here helping you.
Yeah. Help me help you.
Help me.
But what were you doing pre-COVID, and what are you hoping to get back to?
Okay. Pre-COVID, we partner with another organization who has been there from the beginning of the crisis. And they have basically facilitated 600,000 refugees landing. I mean, so they were pulling boats out of the water, pulling people out of the water. So they've really been on the front lines. We decided, we've always been of the opinion, we want to partner with people who are on the ground doing good work. I don't care who you are. If you're leaning in love, baby, I'm with you, right? So we decided to work with this organization, especially as we were sort of unpacking what is it going to mean to live here and how do we best demonstrate the reality of the kingdom. And the easiest way to understand what we do is we basically run a triage center, right? Where it's immediate needs, it's people coming in, they've got nothing left, they're wet, so it's blankets, it's clothes, it's sanitary products, it's a tent, it's sleeping, it's a pillow, sometimes, depending on what we have access to. It's basically facilitating people to survive the camps.
Right.
Because there's the deal, is the camps are closed, they're exposed on hillsides, they're very limited in what they have access to, even though they might have money. Right. They just they're not allowed. They don't have access to so much of this stuff. So we sort of we just hold things together. We provide, we have one part of what we do is we've got an art therapy center where when they're allowed or when they have access to our location, they can come in and we'll teach them to paint or draw or sing or dance. Or we've got barbershops and sewing rooms and all this kind of stuff just to sort of create sort of these stopgap measures, because we can't actually fix anything.
Right.
Which is the great struggle for most of us who were raised in the Western world, is get a plan together, we'll do a thing, we'll get it done, get it sorted, and we'll change the world. Well, I I don't know what that is in these kind of circumstances or situations. So we've been working very hard to find ways to respond more immediately and more profoundly.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if people wanted to find out more, wanted to kind of like track with what you guys are doing, how do they kind of like follow along? How do they support?
There's several ways. If the long version of what we do, of course, like many other people, will write long form newsletters. We have a private Facebook group that you'd have to add me personally on Facebook and then say, hey, I'd love to see be part of your private thing. And we do that simply because we do see lots of pushback in the with people with fascist agendas, or just who are straight out, not like the fascist kind of the way it's thrown around here in North America. It's like people firebombs and stuff like that. So we try to be really careful there. But those are the easiest ways in terms of tracking what we do, is just sort of getting in touch with us on social media or via email. And then all the other information, any other curiosity or, learning curve that you want to be on, I can give you access to those kind of tools.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if you can't find him on Facebook, you can find me on Facebook. You know where I am. Get in touch with me. I'll get you in touch with Johnathan. Johnathan's got a bit of a message he's going to be sharing with us, kind of to cap off this.
A bit of a message.
He's got a word, I guess. He's got a word. So I'm going to turn it over to him to let you do your thing, and I'm out of here. You guys don't have to listen to me for another 15-20 minutes. So
God, it's real.
It's the best day ever.
I'm thankful. I love the opportunity to teach and reflect on the scriptures. For me, I am born and raised in the Pentecostal expression of Christianity. And my sort of trajectory of discovering what is it that God is doing in our time and in the spaces that we're forced to live in, or the socially distant spaces that that we are required to live in, is learning how to ask better questions. It's so often what happens is fear pushes us to these places where we make wilder and wilder assumptions, instead of allowing Jesus to reshape the way we ask what's going on in the world, or what's going on in my heart. And I was thinking about sharing, because I just arrived here this morning, and I was driving, and one of the scriptures that came to my mind was in Luke 24, where the two women show up at the tomb where Jesus had been buried, to place some spices on his body and to pay their respects, and to, I'm sure, ask a lot of questions. And the fascinating thing to me is the question that they're asked when the supernatural experience that they have just explodes out of nowhere. The angel shows up, and the question the angel asks is, why do you look for the living among the dead? And what is striking to me, and this is what I've just been thinking about, is the fact that they weren't looking for the living among the dead. They were looking for the dead among the dead. They for whatever reason, they had not heard all of the clues that Jesus had dropped, that he was going to come back to life, that whatever they experienced in his death was not the end. And they were there looking for what they thought they had saw, and what they thought they had saw was not what they saw. They didn't understand. They didn't see it for what it was. And what I love about the story is that the women at the tomb, based on that experience, they surrendered their expectations about what they were going to find. They surrendered them. And even though their friends, as they're telling the story, thought they were lunatics, they became the first people to experience the reality of what has then changed the world. And I'm shook by the reality that so much of Scripture is littered with examples of people like you and me who were confronted with the fact that they were looking for the wrong things. And I wonder if that's not a question we should be asking in the times that we live in. is, are we looking for the wrong things? Are we expecting God to do things that are based out of our fear, out of our experience, rather than out of the wonder and the glory and the nature of who he is? I think about it often because of the world that I live in and the world that you live in. And I think these are things that we should pause in. We should pause in these moments of fear and uncertainty and go, I know what I think I see, but am I looking for the wrong things? Matthew 16 is one of my favorite passages in the New Testament. And it's the story of Jesus taking his disciples on a little journey. And I love the stories of journey. I love it when Jesus strikes out and expects his disciples to follow, and quite often doesn't tell them where he's taking them. He just says, hey, let's go. And there's so much nuance in the story, layers of, I have so many questions about how that played out. How did you get them to go there? Or how did you get, and usually it's just, he just kept them in the dark until they were there, and then it was too late. So in Matthew 16, it says that Jesus comes to the region of Caesarea Philippi. And part of the way that I study the scriptures is geography matters. Where were they coming from? Where are they going? Caesarea Philippi is a fascinating place because of the role it plays geographically, the role it plays politically, and the role it plays religiously in the immediate area. Caesarea Philippi, roughly in the year 30 AD, is the world headquarters for the worship of the goat god Pan. Very familiar to the Greek pantheon, and Pan was half goat, half man. And he had a temple in Caesarea Philippi where it was the gathering point for anybody who was a part of this kind of religious belief system. And if you want to just, be disturbed even for a moment, just go ahead and Google Pan, because he's a disturbing fellow. But Caesarea Philippi had built an entire, the way their economy worked, the way their religious festivals work, were sort of centered around the worship of Pan. And in the center of their temple, of their worship areas, was a massive rock. And it's actually still there today. And the rock is cracked right down the middle. Obviously, geological pressure over time had cracked this thing, and every once in a while it'll shoot steam out of this crack. Well, in sort of first century belief systems, this was a spiritual reality where this was a gateway to the netherworlds. This was a doorway to the spirit world, and so it became the center of this worship. And there were carefully, we can imagine the worship practices that were exercised when you're worshiping a God who's half goat, half man. Just move along, but just know that was the thing. So the text says that they went there. Now, this was not a place that good God-fearing Jews went. They don't go to this place because this is a place of evil. But Jesus takes the 26-mile hike with his boys to this place. And they decide, I don't know what Jesus was thinking, but he obviously has an agenda, and it's specifically in how do you see the world. So they arrive there, and then Jesus begins this conversation that has become so well known to us. And he says this in verse 13. They arrive in Caesarea Philippi, and he asks his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked, who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gate of Hades will not overcome it. And this is fascinating because of the language that Jesus is using here. So Peter, he's having this interaction with his disciples, and Peter pipes up as Peter was wont to do with a revelation declaration. And Jesus' response to Peter is, oh, you didn't figure this out. Blessed are you. The favor of God rests on you because you've seen. And then he goes into that passage that we use all the time. He says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gate of Hades will not prevail against it. Remember where they are. They're overlooking the temple where this holy rock sits. And he's doing wordplay, and Jesus is using this incredible language to just sort of help them lean into the rich depth of the fact that God is at work in ways that are unexpected. And he says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gate of Hades will not prevail against it. Well, what's fascinating is the name of the rock in the center of the worship of the temple dedicated to the goat god Pan is named the gate of Hades. And I stopped when I was reading this, and I thought, do you know what Jesus is saying? I think Jesus is saying that you see this despair, you see the chaos, do you see the fear, do you see the religious frenzy, do you see the depths to which humanity can go to just trying to assuage the terror that exists in the soul of people who've been trapped in darkness? Do you see this? I think Jesus was saying, do you see the confusion about life and sexuality and politics and the future and the past? Do you recognize what's going on here in front of you? I think Jesus was saying, when you discover who I am, you and the reality of the discovery of what it means to know the one who is before all time and beyond all time, you in that reality, when you discover what it means together to become my people, you're going to start a movement. And it's going to be called the church. A people committed to one another, committed to the knowledge of the one who is beyond all time. And this church, when it's firing on all cylinders, when she discovers the beauty of who she is, she's going to be so compelling, so beautiful, so stirring, so wonderful, that there is no force, there is no darkness, there is no fear that will be able to keep her from being voices of redemption, from being the very manifestation of redemption in a world that longs for redemption. See, I don't think that it matters how messed up or confused or broken or misinformed or degenerate or pagan or whatever language, whatever verbiage we use to throw at that we don't understand. I don't think it matters. I think that when we have a revelation of Jesus, personally and then collectively, I think that is the very essence of freedom. That's the place where freedom looses us to love in ways that are beyond expectation. Because there's the hinge point of what makes the people of God profoundly powerful. It's that they are not afraid to love. They love with fierceness and disregard for their own safety or for their own interests. They love fully putting others before themselves without ever being recognized for what they're doing. They just love. I was thinking, in a conversation rather, I was in the other day, we were talking about with some of my friends, we were talking about the animal kingdom. And we were doing these word plays, not really word plays, but we were sort of tossing around language where we were saying, so an individual bee is a bee, but a group of bees is a swarm, right? And we were doing ants, and a group of ants are called colonies, right? I'm just kind of leave space for you to jump in there. Fish are called, fishes are not the word for a group of fish. They are called schools. You're doing well. I have faith that you're doing well. Whales are called pods. Lions are called prides. Flamingos are called, you're not going to get this one. Flamingos are called a flamboyance. Tell me that's not a good one. Crows are called a murder. Now, here's one for anybody who's ever served in a local church. Buzzards are called a committee. We're just going to move right on. But my favorite are rhinos. And rhinos are called a crash. Now, what's fascinating is the average weight of a rhino is 2 tons. But what makes them unique is how far they can see. They can see a total of 30 feet, but they can run 30 miles an hour. And here's what I would leave you with, just as I sort of reflect on my experience of the kingdom of God in the world and the work of Jesus and what's going on in crazy days like we live in. I'm more excited today. Profoundly disturbed, but profoundly excited about the work of God, because what I find is when you're captured by love, you become a crash, because what is interesting about rhinos is they don't care what's at 31 feet. They're 2 tons. Once they get going 30 miles an hour, you just get out of the way because we're coming. And that's how I feel about love. That's what I'm just sort of captured by when I think of the kingdom of God. When we learn to love, the sheer tonnage, the sheer weightiness, if you want to go glory, of who we become. It no longer becomes about who's going to win the battles. It becomes about who do we love next? Who do we love next? And that is what I hear the voice of God saying in my heart. It's learn how to love better. Learn how to love stronger. Learn how to love with a more radical dispersal of redemptive wonder. I just made that up. I don't know if any of those words work together, but it sounds awesome. Learn to love. What we do know is this. He's given us the keys to the kingdom. And the keys unlock hearts. And when a heart is unlocked, they receive love. This is the mission of the kingdom. Lord bless you guys.